Phileas. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. This afternoon, we're going to talk about dynamic planning here in 2019, since it's nice and early in February. We'll do some introductions in a moment, but just a heads up, we've got Chris Bergen, who's the head of Enterprise Performance Management at Smiths Medical, and we've got Scott Wallace, who's the Senior Director of Transformation Services here at eCapital Advisors.
Hello, good morning. This is Scott Wallace with eCapital Advisors. Just by way of introduction, you see my slide is pretty brief, but I've got 38 years experience helping clients fix their problems in financial planning and analysis. I spent a lot of my career at Big Four Deloitte Consulting, where I helped those clients do those kind of things and fix those. So I was there for 16 years prior to coming to eCapital. And I'm a Big Ten alumni, so I went to the University of Minnesota. So that's my story, and I'll be talking to you through the course of the webinar.
Hi, I'm Chris Bergeron. I am currently working at Smiths Medical, and this is a little background of, you can read, but most of my background is 24 months I've been at Smiths Medical leading their Hyperion deployment. And I've had over 15 years leading finance systems projects at various Fortune 500 companies and managing business processes and systems to enable the forecast and budget process.
Well, again, introduction, Brian Kalish. Jokingly, I've been referred a little bit to the Phileas Fogg of FP&A. Here's a lovely picture of David Niven, who, if you're familiar with Around the World in 80 Days, I always considered my version of Phileas Fogg. What can help you be grounded is I always thought Phileas Fogg and David Niven in this picture was an older gentleman. The side-by-side, unfortunately, he's actually younger than I am in this picture, so keeps me well grounded. Next slide is, again, a little bit of my background. So about 25 years in FP&A, mostly for financial services companies. I worked for a professional society for about 7 years, and then I actually had the great opportunity to start up my own company about 3.5 years ago. But as you can see, I've done a fair amount of travel, North America, South America. So I've got 5 out of the 7 continents. I don't think I'll ever make it to Antarctica unless the penguins suddenly get interested in FP&A. And then I've never been to Australia, but that's just because of the language difference. U.S., I've done, again, a fair amount of travel, but I also have an epic fail, as you can see. Pardon me. In the gray, the 3 states I haven't been to, so I have made it to 47. Not taking anything away from our friends in the upper plains, but I've never been to Montana or North Dakota. But if you look down under Texas, you've got Hawaii, and somehow I've managed in my entire life never to make it to Hawaii. So now I have my motivation to go to Montana and North Dakota because I can't go to Hawaii until I get all 50, and Hawaii would be my 50th. So today we're talking about, dynamic planning. As the slide says, are you ready for the change? If we think about where we are, the days of creating an annual plan and then reviewing that plan 12 months later are basically dead. We're just living in an environment where our technology is changing much faster than our business practices. We really need to find the ability to balance out flexibility and strategy. The goal is still to create an expansive, accountable plan and then revisit the plan on a regular basis. Where we really stand is that we just have to be able to do it on a much more frequent basis than we've ever done before, again, because the world is just changing. It's an exciting time, but there's so much change that's occurring. We just can't come up with a plan in January 1 and think the world's pretty much going to be the same at December 31. To me, it's similar to if you were going to plan a trip across the country. It's 3,000 miles from New York to LA, but you have a plan, but you have to adjust it as we go through time. So really the goal of dynamic planning is to react to events on the ground, both positive and negative, in a much more efficient and profitable basis. So, why dynamic planning? Again, static planning is dead. one of the challenges that we have is dealing with constant change. And as humans, we don't like change. So one of the important components that you must have in adapting a world of greater change is communication. So all through the organization, you have to be able to explain, why is the change taking place, what that change is, how that change will benefit the organization to help it, basically reach the goals that have set for itself. Static planning is nice. It gives us stability, but we just really don't live in that world anymore. So it's much more of a challenge to act in a much more holistic manner. The organization has to work across all these silos that we have. But at the end of the day, it's going to give us a much better product because we're bringing in more and more points of view. The other thing that's important from an allocation is that if you think about how an annual plan works, we basically get to go to the bank once a year and say how much money we're going to need next year. And so it really caps us from our ability to take advantage of opportunities that we hadn't seen, but also to pull out of initiatives that aren't meeting expectations. So we want to have the flexibility to adjust to events on the ground. Scott, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. As you talk about communication, one thing to share is that in my experience working in finance for a lot of years and then consulting in the same space, is that we're not all the best communicators. And we saw that at a client that I was working at where they had a planning process that took 6 or 7 months. They did multiple iterations. And when we got down to it, even before they started thinking about technology, we modified their process by putting in a lot of communication checkpoints, making sure that the executives across the organization were talking with the CFO, and that they were clearly articulating goals and targets and strategies, and so that their plans, when they came together, made sense, and that they didn't have to do multiple iterations because everybody was up to speed. So that communication Brian talks about, whether it's a transformational change or it's just operating more effectively in your planning and budgeting, is a critical component of moving forward in today's environment.
And Scott, to piggyback on that topic that you had there, at Smiths Medical, we went from an offline Excel process for budgeting and forecasting, which it took, the cycle times are very long for us to be able to spin up a plan or forecast that when management pushed through different challenges, they wouldn't even have the numbers rolled up for at least a month or two. And then we went from that heavy loading process of these offline Excel spreadsheets into doing real-time data loads within the deployment of our Hyperion application. We're able to put real-time changes in there and allowing people to do more time analyzing than loading. So it's really helping to help our workforce to be retention with them, to be able to have them be more value-added activities of analyzing.
Great. I mean, the other thing that I would just add before, touching on this next point is, we just live in this world of high level of VUCA, V-U-C-A, high level of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so again, we have to adjust to the world that that we're operating in. The whole strength of dynamic planning, of the dynamic planning concept, is really the ability to gain insights, about the organization, at a much faster pace than we've seen before. But again, to gain the insights, there must be a way to, access our data. Because what we want to do at the end of the day, we want to take our data, convert it into information, transform that information into knowledge, and then that helps us make these better, smarter decisions. So, where does this data come from? Well, one of the areas, obviously, is you're looking at, your transactional data. And your ERP is usually, a really good source of this information. It's been around since the 1960s. But again, if we're starting with our transactional data, it really gives us the opportunity to have that single version of the truth. There's a lot of work that goes into it, but what we've seen from studies is, you can have 37. I mean, I've dealt with a company now; they have 37 ERPs, but there are tools that are available today that weren't available 5-10 years ago to really move us towards a single platform. And obviously, the fewer links and bridges we have between our data and our analytics, increases our efficiency and our ability to, again, make these smarter, faster decisions that we need to thrive in the business world today.
You know, that's a good point, Brian, and I think what we are seeing is the changes in technology are allowing companies to take multiple systems, disparate data sources, and put them together without extensive ETL or transformation work of that data, and build what we're calling a data hub, where it takes that data in its raw form, it makes logical joins, and is available for your planning and forecasting. So don't get too discouraged, because a lot of companies are facing this problem no matter when they're looking at improving through technology or process, how to get the data there quicker, faster, and in an easier way. I know Chris has some examples of what you guys have done.
Yeah, Scott, we've at Smiths Medical, we have one source of our within Oracle EBS, but we have other data systems that provide information that we're using is an HR system that we're able to get some of our workforce details on each employee cost. And we're leveraging the FP&A tool, which is part of Oracle's suite of tools. And this offering, it's amazing what it can do for us to be able to directly connect into some of these systems and load the data real time and make sure we go through the steps of validating the data. It's amazing what this tool can do, the power of it, how it can pull together various types of sources of data. And then people start to trust the data because they know that it goes through this validation step where we know for a fact that with this smart, I would say a smart ETL tool, that it knows exactly when things should be tying out. So therefore, the users start to begin to have trust within the systems. And now we see a lot of people that are using our Hyperion platform to do all of their management reporting. Even the accountants are going in there looking at this because some of the reports that come out of Oracle eBiz are a little bit clunky and a little bit harder to use. And the interface with some of these planning tools now are so much easier for people to drill and slice and dice to find their problems. So.
Great. Well, kind of adding, onto that, thought is, we want to be able to, knock down barriers. If we think about it, planning really is an integral part of our, enterprise performance management. So if we want to call it EMP or BMP business or CMP corporate or F financial, the whole idea is that we want to seamlessly integrate dynamic planning, into the overall EPM structure. Again, the fewer obstacles, bridges, gaps that we have is going to, improve our ability to move, again, data into information, transform it into knowledge. As we build our capability, so if you think about I'm a big fan of the 3C approach, capacity, capability, and collaboration. I mean, by increasing the capacity of the work that we can do, it frees us up to raise the level of the work that we do. So again, it's getting out of this 30, 40-year battle of spending 70 or 80% of our time on data acquisition, verification, and reconciliation, and moving into what I think is the fun stuff is doing the analysis, and moving from providing hindsight to really providing insight and ultimately providing foresight to our business partners. So again, by improving the capacity, we can then hire the people that have the capabilities who can then collaborate with our business partners to help the organization.
Yeah, Brian, at Smiths Medical, we've done a good job of really leveraging the Hyperion tool to be a very collaborative approach to help bring various groups together, because sometimes in organizations it's hard to kind of get the sales team talking with the operations team, talking with different people to pull together forecast and budget. We're leveraging the different versions within Hyperion where we have a sales team that does a weekly sales forecast. We're able to take a version of that during the month and copy it out to take a look at and seed it into a forecast scenario for the month. And we have drivers for the cost of goods to be able to roll up a P&L with having people all kind of collaborating, only putting one data point in and being able to leverage it across different places. So really getting back to that one source of the truth and having less errors for different numbers rolling up.
That's a great example, Chris. I'm working currently at a client along the same lines, whether you call it dynamic or continuous planning, but they've really taken the event out of planning, and they are looking at it as an everyday thing that they update. And where they're focused on is on their supply side of their business. They have a model that predicts what's going on with the products coming in. They're getting it right from the growers out in their network. And so they're predicting what's going to happen every week for 18 months rolling forward. And they share that information with a model on the demand side, which shows the case volumes of these products going to their customers. And that data is integrated on both models. And so they can tell if there's been a change in supply due to weather or shipping or some other thing that happens, and a supply person has gone in and made the change. Demand sees that change and has to react to how I'm going to allocate cases across my customers. And so it's the first time that I've seen real active, continuous, integrated planning happening is at this client. So it's not only doable, it's happening out there with a lot of different clients.
So one thing that's kind of fun, when we talk about, planning and forecasting, there's no getting away from the budget. And if you think about, corporate financial budgeting as we know it really was created in the 1920s. And so, we're talking about, what the world looked like 100 years ago. I've yet to find people. I reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than today. So maybe I'll find someone who loves to do budgeting. But I'm kind of more in kind of the Jack Welch, his famous observation, and I'm actually going to quote, the corporate budgeting process sucks the energy, time, fun, and big dreams out of an organization. It hides opportunity and stunts growth. It brings out the most unproductive behaviors in an organization, from sandbagging to settling for mediocrity. So that's not quite a really great endorsement. I kind of use more of a shorthand version because I'm more of a Dilbert fan, which is, the quote from Scott Adams would be, never base your budget requests on realistic assumptions. This could lead to a decrease in your funding. So, to bash on budgeting for a second, what do we hear all the time? It takes too long, it costs too much, it consumes too many resources, it's fixed and inflexible and becomes quickly irrelevant. And then I think one of the great mistakes we make, which is many companies tie compensation to performance against the budget. So we can come up with a real long list of why the budget should go away. I think we've learned, certainly I have in my travels here in North America, but around the world, I don't see budgets going away. So when you can't make the problem go away, I would look at the second point, which is try to make the process as easy as possible. And that's where we're really seeing some great advances. Again, technology isn't the solution. Technology is always going to be a tool. It's going to be part of the 4 pillars of people, process, culture, and certainly technology. But this is what I think has really changed over the last number of years, is the technology has made our lives a lot better. And again, it's really trying to move, the lower level, lower value activity, whether it's from an offshoring perspective, whether it's looking at RPA, robotic process automation. But again, we need to utilize these new tools that are available so we can, not replace our people, but truly liberate our employees to spend their time in a much more efficient way. So the budget's going to still have to be done, but let's try to figure out ways that not only can we do it faster at a lower cost, but by integrating the concepts of dynamic planning, utilizing it in a much more efficient manner.
If you, another way to put that, Brian, is when I look at budgeting, the technologies are definitely an enabler. And what they enable us to do, as I mentioned in my previous example, if you're in continuous planning where it's not event-driven, like an event being the annual budget process or a monthly forecast or a quarterly forecast, but you're continuously planning, but there is a need for the budget, that doesn't preclude you from taking a snapshot for the next 12 months and handing that budget to your board of directors, your stakeholders, whoever the case might be, because I agree with Brian that there's been attempts to, so to speak, get rid of the budget, but it really hasn't worked. And so using continuous planning methodology and technology to snapshot when you need a picture of your business for whatever reason is still available to you.
So as we kind of move to, a concept that I have more and more of my clients, asking about this, whole concept of on-the-fly modeling. One of my favorite things is, is the model going to be wrong? And, to kind of borrow from George Box, is the model is always wrong. Sometimes the model is useful. And so, we have to accept what we're trying to do, and again, my focus is FP&A, is we're trying to be good. We're not going to be perfect. So, when we start talking about on the fly, it really kind of changes, how the organization, wants to address these issues as we think about how the modeling should be done. And I kind of look at it, there's 5 basic questions. Who in the business is best suited to predict and influence the future? How often is the landscape ahead of your business changing? Is there a better way to measure the past? Is there a better way to capture the future? And is there a better way to predict? Is there a better way to capture the present? And is there a better way to predict the future? And again, it's trying to operate in a much more holistic approach rather than just sitting, in our ivory tower in finance land, saying how the organization should work. It's out there talking to our business partners, understanding how the business, conditions are changing, and they're changing constantly. But, we've got, like I said, we just don't live in a world anymore that we can come up with a plan and hope it works for the year. It must be a much more integrative, much more, I would say, timely, because again, the technology is changing. We can drill down to, our transactions almost in real time coming from, a POS if you're a retailer. And so, we just are trying to come up with better ways to predict the future. Again, it's pennies on the dollars to plan. It's very expensive to have to adjust to a crisis without having that plan in place. And models are one of the ways that can help us think about, how businesses can change, how our environment can change, and how we will react to that change. So, we're talking about planning, and so to some degree you would sit there and say, well, if we need to improve it, it's because, we're making poor planning decisions. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is, I don't think this is, earth-shattering news, is we unfortunately have much too much of a short-term focus rather than a long-term focus. And part of it is, unfortunately, part of it's tied to how our compensations are planned. If we're on a 12-month cycle, guess what? I'm very focused on what's going to happen in 12 months. And you know what? I don't put a lot of emphasis in making decisions that are not going to give me a return in the immediate time frame. So again, businesses don't work on this artificial constraint of 12 months. So whether it's from a forecasting perspective, a planning perspective, life does not end at 12 months. If we have a project that's 14 months, we want to incorporate it and think about what are the best decisions we can possibly make. The other danger that we typically have when we look at, short-term horizons is that we typically tend to not incorporate disasters. So what happens is we spend, let's say if we put ourselves on a 12-month cycle, we spend the first 6 months assuming that we can, we're going to rally in the second half of the year. Unfortunately, by that time, either there's not anything we can do, or the cost to take the actions that we need to take are very, very expensive. So again, what we want to do by looking in a very long-term, much more what's the business activity, not the financial activity. It gives us the opportunity, again, to look for opportunities for how we can do things better, but also, since we're looking at our activity on a much more frequent basis, what's not working. So here, to me, is what would be one of certainly could spend an hour in what I think is the most fun, is, why are, predictive analytics becoming essential for FP&A? And really, it goes with how the whole business is changing. So again, using these four pillars of, technology, people, process, and culture, where we've historically been is we've been reporters, right? We were providing, answering the question, what happened? As our tools have gotten better, we're kind of moving up the chain and becoming, commentators, basically being able to say, where did things happen? Where I think the real push and what's going to separate, the average from the good, from the great to the world class are those organizations that are much more focused on becoming advisors, and even what I'd say the highest level would be to strategists. So we want to get to the point that we're predicting what's going to happen. So we're integrating predictive analytics, giving the business many more choices. And then I think the highest level, and it's very difficult to achieve, would actually becoming strategists, where we're not influencing decisions, we're actually impacting the decisions and actually providing prescriptive analytics. So we get to that point where we're running, Monte Carlo simulations and can really help the organization move in the direction that it wants.
I think, Brian, and this is an area too that a lot of times finance teams get a little hung up in, that they think they don't have the data, or it's a little scary to do predictive modeling. But I've seen it done very effectively in a number of clients where they are using, I'll call them simple techniques, but basically it's a combination of historical information and statistical analysis that you combine in today's tools, and you can start to look at things like, what's my cash going to be on hand every day for the next 90 days with some high degree of accuracy for a property management company where cash is king and they need to know where that cash is coming from. Or what is the likely outcome from a project in a oil and gas exploration company? Much grander scale, but using statistics and history and looking at it, the tools are able to help us predict what that outcome will be based on a number of factors. And so don't be scared by it. I think there is a number of ways to really move ahead from being looking backwards and being descriptive versus looking forward and being predictive. And then the next step that's coming with AI and some other things is that prescriptive, where your technology is helping actually formulate actions and direction.
So, this is always an interesting question. I get this, oftentimes working with clients, should we be looking top down? Should it be bottom up? There are obviously, benefits to both, and and then there's challenges to both. One of the great things people like about, top down is it usually takes time. It takes less time. By definition, there's buy-in from upper level management because that's where it's coming from. What I think is interesting, though, is, we saw zero-based budgeting actually was a concept that was launched back in the late 70s and then died by the early 80s. Part of it was we just couldn't get to the granular level of data that we needed. And we just, in all honesty, just didn't have the technology with the proper firepower to really utilize it. So it became miserable and horrible, and so it died. What's interesting is I'm working with more and more people, and I'm really seeing, a renaissance really for ZBB, as organizations now have the tools and the access to the data. Because, it really wasn't that long ago that a completely acceptable answer about data was, we don't have it, it's too expensive to get, or by the time we get it, it's out of date. I would argue for all intent and purposes, data is basically free, immediate, and unlimited. So the question is, how do we then leverage our access to data with the new tools to, again, help us do a better job of forecasting and budgeting and planning?
Yeah, Brian, I know that at Smiths Medical here, I know that we are doing more of this zero-based budgeting just because of the technology that we have available to us. When we look at our SG&A, we have the modules of the workforce module, and we also have the CapEx module. The workforce module, that's about 80% of our SG&A spend is on people. And having the workforce module functioning very well with getting a great feed from our HR system, then having drivers in there on basic things that you can't control. It's all the different government taxes and government programs and allocations you have to put in there. It builds itself pretty easily in your budget to get 80% of your costs there. And then you have the CapEx module, which is roughly another about 10 to 15%, which at the end of the day, you have projects that are done, they need to be capitalized, and the amortization rolls onto the P&L. So you just have a small amount of like 5 to 10% that is more of that kind of office supplies and travel, and those are some of those things that you can look at, but I don't know if it really moves the needle in making sure you guys will hit certain metrics or not, because it's the smaller little pieces there. And then I know also with like a top-down look that typically at a public company, you have a small subset of people in a closed room that determine what the kind of our investor community is expecting the results, and that's a quick little area to help provide kind of the compass to direct the organization down a path strategically to try to make sure that we're aligned with the investors' expectations. But you do need to have a good bottoms up to make sure that you can go on that same charted course that the management team has determined with their compass.
So switching gears a little bit, as part of the job of FP&A, so we need to have financial acumen, we need to be able to understand the business, but we also have to be great storytellers and be good communicators. And obviously, one of the things that's changed over the last couple of years, and again, it's a tool, not a solution, is the technology that's out there. So, if we really think about it, data visualization, at its most basic level is the visual presentation of data, right? An Excel spreadsheet doesn't count. Finance people, by definition, we can look at a spreadsheet. We speak math. We can look at numbers, and it has meaning to us. But for many of our business partners, it doesn't. So what was that first step of taking something like Excel and spreadsheet, whatever we want to call it, and the charts that we're creating from it? So what we want to be able to do, at this very first level of data visualization is we certainly want it, to let us ask questions. To give us the ability to explore what's out there. And then, there's a big difference between exploring and explaining. When we're exploring, which, side note, I'm much more on the explorer side. I don't know. When I'm looking at data, oftentimes, I have no idea where I'm going to go. But I just want to have the ability to pull up information, see what it looks like, look for trends. It's a little bit out of the scope of what we're addressing today, but, that's why when we start thinking about RPA and artificial intelligence, why it's going to be so important, because it's the amount of data that's out there. So all the data visualization is a tool for us to be able to encapsulate information very quickly and very clearly. I mean, we've gotten, it's always great to learn things, and one of the things I've learned is we're now entering a world of Bronto bytes of information, which is 10 to the 27th, which is just incredible. So, if you think about it, and I want to get, Chris and Scott's thoughts on it, but when we're creating visualizations, we have to think about what's the information that's important to the audience, how much detail do we need, what are going to be the actions that we take from what we discover, and then again, what are the learned insights and foresights? How is that going to affect what we're currently doing? And then just to be kind of a geek for a moment, if you'll indulge me, when people say, well, we can do this in a spreadsheet, or we can do it in a summary. Just to give you the power, an idea of the power of visualization, just to hit 4 facts really quick. The human brain, can process entire images that our eyes see in about 13 milliseconds. If you think about it, about 80% of the information we as humans consume are through our eyes. When you want to understand what's the difference or what's the power of visualization versus the written word, is that the human brain processes images about 60,000 times faster than they do words. And then, when you think about all the presentations, all the meetings, all the reports we're involved with, so people consume it, data, information, how much do they retain 3 days later? And again, we've done studies about this. If they heard it, it's about 10%. If they saw it, the recall is as high as 65%. So it's incredible how we can utilize data visualization, again, to become much more efficient.
Yeah, Brian, at Smith, we ended up doing a great heat chart type diagram that we did with our expenses comparing prior forecasts and versus budget. And it's amazing how it helps to pop numbers off the screen, because you take a basic report that is just a bunch of numbers and variances on there, but then you add the color of the heat of showing who's doing well and who's doing worse in a variance of reds and greens. It really helps management to make quicker decisions and see certain things that are coming to light, and that's, I feel like, has really helped people to see things, and they really are wanting to see more data kind of shown in these heat charts, so they can now see things more in a third dimension versus just numbers and X and Y basis. Now kind of the world of color has now come to them, and they're excited, and they're able to now make decisions quicker with that.
Chris, that's a great example. Just in closing this section, one of the things, even 10 years ago, we'd always be talking to our clients about the reporting that they wanted, whether it was Excel-based or some other form. And now the first thing that I hear when I walk into clients is, can we create dashboards? Show me dashboards. Well, they're easier, they're faster, and they're quicker to create than ever before, but you got to be careful on what you're going to put on them. And part of what I always use with clients is, if you put something on a dashboard, can someone take action, or is someone moved to action because of what they've seen? Because if they're not, then why are you putting it there? It's just data. You could put a data on a report, you could leave data in the system. But if it's moving a person to action or it's actionable information, that's something that belongs on a dashboard. To the point Chris made with the heat maps, right away they're more moved to action than if they just saw a bunch of numbers. So keep that in mind as you're going through your transformation.
So, when we talk transformation, by definition, we're talking about change. And so, for me, and I don't know if this goes back to just my undergrad days and thinking about the physics courses I took. When I hear change, I think of Newton. And again, a free takeaway from this webinar this afternoon is that Brian's a geek. I freely admit that. So, let's think about, so we want to do a financial transformation. Why does Newton matter? Well, if you think about the first law of motion, which is also the law of inertia, an object at rest stays at rest, and that object in motion stays in motion at the same speed in the same direction unless acted upon about an unbalanced force. So basically, people, organizations, structures, environments, their natural state is not to change. So if you want to make change, you are going to have to apply a force. Now, if you're going to apply a force to something, it's important to keep in mind Newton's third law, which is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So again, when you want to go down this path of transformation, and again, at 30,000 feet, everyone kind of agrees, but when we always hear the devil's in the details. And so, what's important, is you've got to be able to plan for change. And there's a very important acronym. It's called ADKR, A-D-K-R, which is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And so when you're trying to convince, whether it's an individual, whether it's an organization, that a change is necessary, you've got to be able to address these questions, which is there awareness of the need of change? Is there a desire to participate in and support the change? Is there knowledge about how to change? Is there the ability to implement the required skills and behaviors? And is there reinforcement, which is critical to sustain the change? Because so many times, and I'm sure Chris has seen this, and Scott's seen this, and everyone on the webinar has seen it, is that a change takes place, it doesn't get supported, and it dies a miserable death. So, when we think about change, we really have to break it into three parts. It's preparing for the change, it's managing the change, and it's reinforcing the change. And again, I reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than today. I have never seen an effective, long-lasting, sustainable change if there isn't support from above. It doesn't happen. For example, I was in Amsterdam last year actually teaching a class on this particular assignment, and people were saying, oh, how do you change if there's not support from above? And I go, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I've never seen it. So you've got to make sure you've got that support from above. The senior management is behind it. And it's really, really important to engage the employees so that they understand. There's oftentimes the error that just because I see the obvious need for change, everyone sees that. It's a very myopic way of looking at things, but as humans, that's typically how we are. But it's important to keep in mind that people don't typically want to change, and that you've got to continuously reinforce the need for the change.
There are a number of really good, I think, articles out available to people on change and the change cycle. And it's funny because on one of my projects, I learned this from a consultant on my team, and he put up a map, and it looked like a backwards, it looked like an upside-down camel. It had a big dip in the middle of this process, and he said that's the valley of despair. And so be aware as people are going through it, even if you build a lot of momentum to begin with, they will all fall into the valley of despair for a while. And the job is to let them process and help them process through the change so that they come out of it on the other side. And they always do. And you may not get everybody, but you should get the majority. But just be aware of that as part of the change cycle.
So, as we're kind of coming to the close, we want to, talk on and touch on a couple, best in class with finance transformation. Again, it's important. It has to be done, in a very holistic approach. I mean, we don't run, FP&A is not a business. There's no company that does FP&A as their business model. We support the organization. But as we're going through change, it's important to keep a couple of things, in mind. One of them is you have to manage your business partner's expectations. I mean, if you try to please everyone, you may end up pleasing no one. So it's very important that you need to work with each one of your constituents to determine what are the most important activities. Because if everything's important, then nothing's important. So again, the idea is we're trying to build, capacity, capability, and collaboration. You have to really just be able to bring in all people, listen to what they're saying, be willing to change. Again, that feedback loop is very important. Everyone may have the greatest idea and agree with it, but once you see it's not going the right way, you've got to have the flexibility to say, this isn't working. It doesn't make any sense. We need to change. So again, it's very, very important to get, like I said, that buy-in from the stakeholders. You've really got to be able to identify who those stakeholders are. You have to be able to identify what their needs and requirements are. I like to say you have to engage them with their head, their hearts, and their hands. Again, you've always got to have senior management support. And again, what I've seen is where transformations fail is when there is no mechanism to track or measure progress. Because again, the feedback loop is critical. That's what sustains a transformation. Again, what we're talking about is hard. I mean, I live in a world of analogy and movies and sports. And one of my favorite lines comes from a movie called A League of Their Own. And at one point, someone's going to quit, and the manager asks the player why they're going to quit. They go, because it's hard. It's like, well, of course it's hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So by definition, when we're going through a transformation, it's hard. So we have to give all our stakeholders the feedback to understand how we're doing. What changes are we making? Are we listening to them? Again, it's important to, approach this in a very holistic way.
Make no mistake about it. The difficulty of the transformation is there, and go into it with your eyes wide open. I found a very interesting study that was done in 2018. FSN, which is an online collaborative network on LinkedIn, did a survey of over 1,000 CFOs and financial executives, and what they found was over 67% of them said their people were stuck in old processes using old technologies, and it just took too much of their time. But 85% of that same group said they needed to innovate. They needed to be on the edge of innovation. So you've got opposing things going on with finance organizations and all kinds of size and shapes of them, and that the leaders want to innovate, and yet everybody's still stuck in the old ways. And so this change factor and this resistance is real, even though some are trying to go forward. And that's why you'll see a lot of different different information about where's your company? Are they advanced? Are they just starting in their journey? And most people are in the middle someplace. And so be thinking of that as you're trying to move forward with your transformation, and how do I get people excited about moving forward and get off the legacy processes and tools.
And, kind of just adding on to what Scott was saying, I mean, you have to understand how the organization is going to adapt. I mean, change is real. Success at financial transformation demands more than, the best strategic and tactical plans. It requires an intimate understanding of the human side as well. And again, when you think about transformation, you can have the greatest tools, you can have the best people, you can have the greatest processes, but if there isn't alignment between where management wants the company to go and where the people want to go, the transformation will fail. It's like building a house. All the pieces have to be in line, going in the right direction. You've got to build that foundation. So again, if you have, and I think just kind of echoing on what Scott's saying, if you have a lot of people that are very comfortable in a spreadsheet world, and then you want to bring in much more powerful tools, you're going to have to question, do you have people that can make the adjustment? Or are you going to have to bring in new people? Because they'll fight it. Like I said, anytime you're trying to push people out of their comfort zone, they're going to fight it. So you have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, organizations are comprised of people. It sounds very simple, but we have a tendency to forget that. And again, communications, I can't overemphasize. Again, management needs to over-communicate and has to be willing to listen to the people that the change is impacting to understand what's going on. And then just in closing, something very dear and near to my heart, there's a concept out in the universe. It's called IBCS. It's International Business Communication Standards. And the idea being that we should have a grammar around how we present information, that similar things should look similar. The fact that the way that Scott or Chris or myself would present to senior management is going to be a function of colors I like, the graphs I like, the fonts I like, how I like to present information. And all of that should be standardized. And one of the things that always makes me laugh is people say, well, then you're going to stifle creativity if you do that. And if you think about it, is there a universal language in the world? And I would argue very quickly that sheet music is a universal language in the sense that regardless of the time period, the type of music, geographically, is if you can read sheet music, you can understand it. And that's really how our presentation should be, is there should be no time spent on understanding what I'm looking at. It should be clear, it should be concise, it should be honest, and then I can focus that time on making the best decisions. And so there's a whole universe out there. If you're interested, it's a nonprofit. Please feel free to reach out to me. It's just something that I feel passionate about. But as I work with organizations, one of the things, in addition to are we running the right reports, is anyone using this information? Is it being created in the most efficient way possible? Again, going back to the 3 C's, the more capacity we can build, the more capability we can build, and the more collaboration we can have. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the mothership in Minneapolis, and do we have any questions?
Nope, we do not have any questions, and we appreciate everybody staying on the line. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar for those of you that maybe missed some pieces of it or want to listen to it or share with others. So look for an email to come in the next couple of days. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us at eCapital, and we appreciate your time joining the call today. Thank you.